Welcome to the Brain Picker Pro Show, live from Lake Wiley, South Carolina. This is Larry Goins. How you guys doing? Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We appreciate the shares. We appreciate the feedback and the likes. We always try to bring you nothing but content, nothing but great information from what I call the best of the rest. People in the industry and the top level of their industry, right? And it's all about real estate, entrepreneurship, funding, and business, anything to do with that. So thank you so much. Please share, please like, please leave a comment. If you don't mind, we greatly appreciate it. Today's guest I'm really, really excited about is Mark Roderick. He's an attorney. Don't hold that against him. Okay, he's a good guy, right? So his specialty, his niche, his passion is crowdfunding, and he's going to share anything and everything you need to know about crowdfunding. If not, he's going to show you how to get the rest of the story today on the show. So Mark, welcome. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome, awesome. You know, a lot of people have heard the term crowdfunding, and they may even think they know what crowdfunding is. Why don't you give us the lowdown and the specific, because a lot of people think, well, it's just raising money, or it might be a PPM or this or that, but what is crowdfunding?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a great definition that you can use at the next time you're at a cocktail party and someone says, what is crowdfunding? And you say this, and like you will, you'll be like, oh, he's cool. He knows what he's talking about. Which is the goal in life, right? To be the cool one. So
at the party,
at the cocktail party. So when we say crowdfunding, it can mean a lot of different things. A useful definition for cocktail parties is anytime you raise money using the internet. So that is the cool definition. If you're raising money using the internet, you are crowdfunding. Now, within that universe, there are two worlds of crowdfunding, very distinct from one another. One is the Kickstarter and Indiegogo world. They came first. And often when I am going to stand up and speak in front of a crowd, talk about crowdfunding, I can tell right away that some people think I'm going to talk about Kickstarter.
Right.
So that is the world we call donation-based crowdfunding or rewards-based crowdfunding, where you want to start a business, or you want to make your first CD, you're in a band or something, and you're asking for donations.
Okay.
You're going to give people a baseball cap or something, or a copy of the CD when it's finally made, if it is made. And but you're not giving them as stock in your company. You're not giving them anything financial. You're just give me money. I'm a good person. I have a compelling story. That is donation-based crowdfunding. That's Kickstarter, and that is a world that has very few laws because it's just people asking for gifts. And so I have represented some donation-based crowdfunding portals, but that is generally a world that doesn't even need lawyers for the most part. People just asking for money from their fellow citizens. Donation-based crowdfunding. The world where lawyers like me spend all their time is the other world in the crowdfunding universe, and that is called equity crowdfunding. And it's only called that because no one thought of a better word to contrast it with reward-based crowdfunding. Equity-based crowdfunding doesn't mean just equity. It can mean debt and all kinds of other things. But the idea is, in that world, you're raising money for the company, but you're not just asking for gifts. You're asking people to make an investment in your company, an investment. Right. So that's what equity-based crowdfunding is. And that's where I live and spend all my time. Now, in that equity-based world, there are subsections of the equity-based world, and I can talk about those if you want, or we can talk about baseball or something else if you want next.
Well, now that you've piqued my interest, I want to hear, what are the subsections of the
Okay.
equity-based crowdfunding?
Well, I thought you might ask. Um, so, so this is how it works. Crowdfunding, the equity-based crowdfunding, was created in 2012 by a law that was signed into law May 5th, 2012, by then President Obama. It was called the Jobs Act, Jumpstart Our Businesses Act. Bipartisan. We used to get that kind of legislation.
Right.
Bipartisan, Republicans, Democrats, everyone supported it in 2012. And in American laws, when a big law is written, it's subdivided, just as you might subdivide a book, because you don't want to
Right.
just go on and on and on. And the different pieces of the law are called titles. Title 1, Title 2, Title 3. That's all that means. And I say that by way of background because there are three kinds or flavors of equity crowdfunding: Title II crowdfunding, Title III crowdfunding, and Title IV crowdfunding. And so those titles don't mean anything other than that's just a reference to the part of the Jobs Act where they were used. So I don't want to confuse anyone.
Sure.
And very briefly, now I will say that one of the I write this blog, and one of the very first things I put on my blog was called a crowdfunding cheat sheet, which is a table that lists the different kinds of crowdfunding and kind of summarizes the rules. So that's still there. A lot of people still look at it. And so I'm about to give you a very brief summary of that table, but don't anyone think they have to memorize this because it's all available. So Title II crowdfunding is for accredited investors only. And when I use that term, accredited investors, do your listeners generally know what that means?
Yeah, some of them will, but you might want to explain what an accredited investor and a
Very
sophisticated
briefly,
investor are.
accredited means someone who makes $200,000 a year, or $300,000 with his or her spouse, or has a net worth of $1 million without his or her principal residence. And that used to basically mean a rich person. Back in 1982, when those same limits were adopted, $200,000 a year was a lot more than it is today. So the idea is it means kind of rich people, but inflation has deteriorated that. So, but anyway, that's what accredited means. And Title II crowdfunding is for those folks only, accredited investors.
Mm-hmm.
And in our securities laws, ever since the beginning, the 1930s, when they were all written, one of the fundamental tenets of our securities laws is rich people can take care of themselves because they can hire expensive lawyers and accountants and advisors. So the government doesn't need to protect them, okay? As a result, in Title II crowdfunding, because only accredited investors can participate, there's basically no rules. It's wild, wild west. Let the buyer beware. Which, from an entrepreneur's point of view, is good. It makes raising money from accredited investors pretty quick and pretty, relatively at least, inexpensive. Then, so that's Title II crowdfunding. Accredited investors, wild, wild west. Title IV, I'm going to skip over 3 for a second.
Okay.
Because Title IV is pretty normal. It's basically a mini public offering. And so it's very similar to what was there before. You have to write a thick book and you have to get approval of the SEC. It takes a fair amount of time, a fair amount of money. But the benefit is you can raise money from non-accredited investors. And you see there, because non-accrediteds are involved, now the government needs to step in and say, okay, well, you need approval. You need to explain all this to us because we need to protect the non-accredited investors.
Right.
So Title IV is basically a small public offering. And then Title III is a brand new animal in American securities laws. It also is available to non-accredited, so you know that the government is going to come in and put a lot of protections in place. And it does, it's a new thing. You can only raise $1 million a year, so they kept it small. And investors are very, very limited in how much they can invest. You know, the idea was people were afraid that all those bad entrepreneurs out there are going to steal money from widows and orphans. So they made it hard to steal money from widows and orphans. They, among other things, they limit how much the widows and orphans can invest, and they also require that you can only, Title III only happens through licensed entities that are kind of like mini broker dealers, so-called funding portals. There are all these, it's restricted, and there are all these protections in place for Title III crowdfunding. What they all have in common is you can advertise, and that's what's so new about crowdfunding. So one of the other tenets of securities laws for 85 years was that if you go public, if you're Facebook or Tesla, I used to say General Motors, but that got so dated, it showed everyone when I was born. So now I say Facebook and Tesla because it makes me, more cool. There you go. That's the idea. You're more hip. So if you're a public company, you can advertise, the rule used to be, but if you're a private company, you can't advertise your securities, your offering. That was true for 85 years, and that's what the Jobs Act changed. So for any Title II, Title III, or Title IV crowdfunding, you are free to advertise, meaning, usually is what it means, you can have a website. And if you think about it, the old way of raising money, if you want it, in 2011, you wanted to raise money for a business, for a real estate project or something, you had to go about it privately. You had to find people with money or find people who knew someone with money, or find someone who knew someone who knew someone with money. A very time-sapping, difficult, inefficient effort. Whereas now, you want to start a new business today, you want to raise money for your podcast, you can create a website today and be online and be raising money for that business, and potentially, of course, be contacting every investor in the world. That's a big difference. So that's what makes crowdfunding.
So you could get your own website, and that would qualify as a licensed portal or an approved portal, or
whatever. You could, if you're doing it on your own, you can do a Title II raise to accredited investors right away. Boom, you're up and running. You're reaching every accredited investor in the world. If you're doing a Title IV raise, first you have to go to the SEC and get their approval, and then reach every investor in the world. And if you're doing a Title III raise, you have to have your offering listed by one of these funding portals, and then reach every investor in the world. But in any case, at some point, you are reaching every investor in the world rather than just the 6 people that you happen to know.
So let me ask you this question, Mark. You mentioned you've got a cheat sheet, which I'm looking at it up here on one of my dual monitors up above. Could you give our viewers and listeners the website that they could go to get that cheat sheet?
Yeah, my blog is at Crowdfund, spelled the way it sounds, Crowdfund, and then attny.com. So it's an abbreviation for attorney. Crowdfund, attny.com. But it's not hard to find. If you type Mark Roderick crowdfunding attorney into Google, you will find it immediately. If you type just Mark Roderick into Google, you will find it immediately. it's hard not to find it, actually. If you're trying to find information about crowdfunding, you are going to find my blog.
Yeah, that's all I did, guys. All I did was go to crowdfundattny.com, and he's got a search bar. I just typed in the search bar, cheat sheet, and I had it up literally in 2 seconds.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, there's tons that you will see. There's, in addition to the cheat sheet, there's about 250 other posts with information. It's an incredible wealth of information up there. There's no marketing stuff. Just information about all the different legal stuff that comes into play when you're doing crowdfunding.
Just raw content. So Mark, you've mentioned these portals that you could be up and running doing a Title III and raise up to $1 million per 12 months. Could you share some of those portals with us?
Sure. I mean, there are a bunch of them. I'll give you a few that I represent, not all of them that I represent. So those I represent, I'm not going to mention your name. I'm sorry. I hope you don't watch this podcast. But anyway, one is Small Change, just one word, smallchange.com. It is unique because it's, I believe, still the only Title III website that does real estate only. Just a terrific website. Another is Honeycomb Credit. They make small business loans. Another is MainVest. One word, MainVest. They also make small business loans, but slightly larger small business loans. So those are a few that I represent. Probably the largest by volume is one called StartEngine.
Okay.
Yeah, they do all kinds of stuff. But yeah, if your listeners want to log into any of those, you can see what Title III is all about. And there are lots of rules and stuff, and all those sites follow those rules.
So what you're saying is, if you're looking to raise, let's just say you're starting out, you want to raise $1 million or less, right? Maybe you're trying to get your wholesaling business up and running, or you're trying to build a rental portfolio or whatever, do some seller finance or fix and flips. You want to raise up to $1 million. You can use one of these portals that you've just mentioned, and you can raise money through that portal and be in compliance with the SEC rules and regs.
That is exactly correct. Now, if you were going down a decision tree, if you came to me and said, hey, Mark, I want to do some fix and flips. I only need to raise, less than $1 million.
Right.
What should I do? The first thing I would say is accredited investors only. If you think you can raise the money from accredited investors only, do that, because it is faster than Title III. Okay. Title III is, painstaking, because this is the government protecting non-accredited investors. If you're just dealing with accredited investors, it's always faster and simpler. And so now I will say, in the Title II space, real estate is king. So when you talk about fix and flips and so forth, it turned out, when the Jobs Act was passed, because it does have to do with the internet, everyone thought this is going to be for high-tech Silicon Valley kinds of companies, social media, new technologies, artificial intelligence. No. Very soon, I wrote a blog post that said, what about real estate? It seems like a great investment because people can understand it. They see the building. Well, I'm not saying anyone followed that blog post, but very shortly thereafter, everyone forgot about all the high technology stuff, and crowdfunding, Title II crowdfunding, focused on real estate. And real estate has still got to be 90 or 95% of all crowdfunding by volume is real estate. So if you are a real estate entrepreneur, you definitely should be learning about crowdfunding.
Yeah, and the Title II, which is a 5063, that is
C.
your
Yeah,
accredited investors only.
that is correct. Title II crowdfunding, also known as SEC Rule 506C, as in Charlie.
Right, right. That's good. Now, the Title III, which allows you to use a portal, you said Title II, which is accredited investors only, is faster, but could someone not simply go to StartEngine.com and just click on Raise Capital and just put their information in and start raising money, or is there a process you have to go through before you can post your opportunity or your business there to be able to attract capital?
Yeah, there is a process. I mean, they
Okay.
have to accept you. You have to pay them money, um, and then you have to go through the process of putting together your offering materials.
Okay.
In Title III, the offering materials are put together in it was what called a Form C. Again, C for Charlie, a Form C. So you go to StartEngine or one of the other portals. You start putting together the Form C. They are required by law to perform certain background checks on you to make sure you are not a former podcaster. No, that's a joke. Uh, to make sure do not have any securities law violations in your past. So there's a level of due diligence that they are required to perform on you. I'm not saying it takes a long time, but then even once you're online, these investor limits come into play. So I mean, I am serious about investors being both accredited and non-accredited being really limited into how much they can invest in your deal. In fact, not only in your deal, but these limits apply to all the Title III deals that an investor participates in during a 12-month period. So, you're looking at really small investment amounts under Title III. That is of course intended to protect the widows and orphans, but it's a real
Sure.
limit. It's a limit in raising money under Title III.
Sure. And you know what? I'm on startengine.com right now and looking at investment opportunities, and they've got 63 different investments there. And what's unique is Start Engine is one of the investment opportunities on startengine.com. So you can actually literally invest in that company, right? Right on their own
You
website.
you can invest in StartEngine in now, just to make it more interesting, their offering is a Title IV offering, also known as Regulation A. So they are raising money for themselves under Title IV, even though their site is mostly dedicated to Title III. Nothing wrong with that.
Right,
But
right.
you see there are a lot of opportunities on their site. So as long as we're talking about that. So in the beginning, StartEngine limited the offerings on its site. It allowed companies on its site only after vetting them and deciding that they were reasonable opportunities.
Right.
And that is what many funding portals continue to do, including the three that I gave you. But then StartEngine stopped doing that. And they will now allow just about anybody on their site. And so that has pros and cons if your
Right.
listeners are investors. Um, you know, you'll see if you start looking through that list, you'll see some companies that maybe look promising to you. You'll see others that you'll say, how the heck did they get on here? So there's a whole, they've now taken more of a so-called bulletin board approach to, that if you pay our fees and you pass the background checks, we will list you. And that has pros and cons. It increases volume and increases short-term revenue, but then it's not the same. You're not creating the same brand power, I think, as sites like in the real estate side. The two big sites are Real Crowd and CrowdStreet, and they carefully vet their deals, and so that builds a brand image of quality. If I'm investing in a deal on that site, I kind of have a good feeling that someone else more knowledgeable than I have has looked at the deal. So those are the kind of two approaches to creating a portal: either a bulletin board where anything goes, or a more limited selection of carefully selected wine or something.
So that's probably why there are some of them on the sites that maybe they've only raised 15 or 20 or 30 or $40,000 out of several hundred thousand they're trying to raise, because it's more of just a platform, and it really dilutes the quality of the investment.
Yeah. The other thing they do for the same short-term cash flow reason is a lot of the deals on their site will say, so in Title III, you have to specify a minimum amount you're trying to raise. And until you raise that amount, you can't start spending it. They will have many companies specify a minimum raise of $10,000. And so as soon as they raise 10 grand, they can start spending the money. And StartEngine then gets a commission on 10,000. Well, there is no business in the universe that becomes viable just because it's raised $10,000, right?
Right.
That pays rent for a couple months. So they've done that artificially to, it makes the statistics look better. Oh, this percentage of our companies have met their minimum threshold. Well, yeah, because we set the minimum threshold so low, but that also dilutes quality. And if you're a sophisticated investor and that $10,000 is not going to make this company viable, you're just not going to invest.
Right.
And it has the unintended effect of keeping sophisticated investors away from the site. And I think that's a very unfortunate. It's a short-term decision, which I think has very bad long-term consequences.
So is there a way, you've told us that, what I'm hearing is that's one thing you should be aware of and look for. What is their minimum to be fully funded, right?
Yes.
So I'm assuming that it tells their minimum. Like I'm looking at one here, it says, raised of 10,000 to 1 million.
There you go.
66,000. So the 10,000 is the minimum that it takes for them to be able to say, okay, we'll take your money and we'll run with it. And
that's exactly right. And look at that. Look at that business. 10,000 to 1 million. What?
Yeah.
If you're not viable at $10,000. So in other words, you're not sharing important information with the investor. What is the minimum you need to be a viable business? Right. And if I'm any kind of sophisticated investor, I'm not investing until you reach that minimum. And setting that minimum so artificially low is just, it is bad. It's bad for everybody, I think. Whereas if you go to some of the other sites, so here's an example. I mentioned Honeycomb Credit. Right. They facilitate loans to small businesses. One of the deals on their sites, typical deal, you had a restaurant, a very successful restaurant. They want to expand, use their brand name. They want to expand by buying a food truck, which will be branded with the restaurant. Very clever idea. And now this food truck is going to drive downtown at lunch using the brand identity and serve meals to office workers. Great idea. They need a $60,000 loan, $70,000 loan. They're too small to get it from a bank. So they raise money on Honeycomb successfully. The minimum is $70,000. That's what they need. Right. If you say we're going to buy a food truck for $70,000, but we're setting our minimum at 10,000. What the heck does that mean? We're going to
Yeah,
buy the tires, but we're not going to get the engine.
exactly.
It's crazy. So I mean, that's the right way to do it. Tell investors what you need to make a viable business, and so that was a successful offering on Honeycomb.
That's good. That's good. And they do have some good, nice looking offerings here, and
They do.
like their target raise is not just 10,000. There are some 10,000s, but there's some 40,000, 25,000, and more. So that's good. What are some other things people need to look out for when considering an investment in in one of these, Title III?
Well, I mean, I personally, I have invested. I invest at sites that I trust. I won't invest at the bulletin board sites. I want somebody to have looked at that investment. And beyond that, know that companies raising money using Title III typically are just very small companies. These are typical, not always like that restaurant. It's not a very small company, but these are going to be risky investments. And it's great to invest in something you know about.
Right.
If you just see, oh, this is a social media company, the next Facebook, how many companies, or Uber, we're the next Uber. How many companies have you seen that said we're the next Uber? Yeah. Or we're the Uber for groceries, or we're the Uber for this or that or that. Right. It's been like 10,000 of those companies. All of them failed. And for that matter, Uber itself might fail. So it's great to invest in something you know about.
Right.
That's not very sophisticated advice, but these are small companies. They're startups. You're very likely to lose your money in many of them. Now, on small change in real estate, you're not very likely to raise your money or lose your money, and that's what has made, I think, real estate so successful in crowdfunding.
Yeah, Small Change is a good-looking site too. It is
terrific site.
That's really good. That's
terrific
really
site.
So talk to us a little bit about. There's people out here watching this or listening to this and thinking, I want to grow my real estate business. I want to scale my business, or I want to start maybe I'm wholesaling. I want to start a fix and flip business, or maybe I have an idea for something I've always thought about. What are some of the things that they need to ask themselves to determine, do I need a Title II, III, or IV, and what's the best route for me to take?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. So, I mean, the first, if you're just, you've thought of a new business, the first thing you're going to do is go through all the steps that you used to go through. Where am I going to get funding? My credit cards, my bank account, my savings account, my IRA. Those are the easiest sources of funding. My parents, my uncle. So you're going to think about all those sources of funding first. They're easiest.
Right.
Depending on the nature of the business, you might be, talking to so-called angel investing groups. Most cities have these groups. They will consider funding startup ventures depending on the nature of the. So you want to think about all those kinds of potential investors. First, they didn't just go away. Crowdfunding will, let's say within 10 years, if you ask me this question in 10 years, I'm going to say, oh, go online. That's your first step. Right. Just like if you ask me, how should I make my travel arrangements to California next week, I'm going to go online. Right. And that's kind of what's going to happen with crowdfunding too, but it's not there yet. So after you have thought about all those more traditional ways, then you're going to think about crowdfunding. And typically, if it's a startup business, you're not thinking about Title IV. You know, Title IV is a public offering of stock. And if you're a startup business, you really have no business thinking about public offerings. So you're talking about Title III or Title II, and it depends on how much money you are trying to raise, and it depends on the business. Some businesses are very work well with Title III because Title III is kind of the intersection of social media and capital raising. So, for example, a type of company that's been very successful, breweries, companies that have social media followings, and breweries are one of them. A lot of people like craft beer. I'm one of them. Similarly, at the other end of the seriousness spectrum, let's say you are developing a drug for cystic fibrosis, a horrible, horrible, incurable disease, at least incurable so far. So lots of Americans, people worldwide, have been affected with cystic fibrosis. Title III allows you to reach out potentially to this interest group of people, ordinary people, non-accredited investors, who, you know, just like on the craft beer side in the less serious range of the spectrum, have not only, they're going to invest in a cystic fibrosis treatment, not only or even principally because they think they're going to make a lot of money. Their hearts are in it, right? Their hearts are in the right place. So if that is the kind of company you have, or you're selling a consumer product, it's a cool consumer product, and if you can get a lot of Facebook followers, Title III may well make sense for you because it's that same kind of thing. If it's just a financial investment, then Title II probably makes more sense because all those accredited investors, they have hearts too, but they're just looking to make returns. So that's the kind of analysis that you go through.
That's really good. That is good information, Mark. I really, really appreciate that. It's a good way to let people know where do you start. But you really start internally first, right?
Internally.
Credit cards, savings, friends and family, retirement accounts, things like that, correct?
That's right. You are still your best source of capital.
That is great. I love it. I love it. So I've learned a lot about crowdfunding and about the websites. We'll make sure and put all those in the show notes. Mark, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, how would they get in touch with you for some more information?
They would go to my blog, and all my contact information is there. That's the best thing. And when you go to the blog, send me an email. There is this old-fashioned device on my desk that sometimes rings. My technology people call it a telephone. I think that's what it's called. So you can call. My phone number is on the website also.
Good.
But as you know, phones are hit and miss, and one of my least favorite pastimes is telephone tag. So if you send me an email, I will write you back. I 100% promise, and we will set up a time to talk.
That's great. That's great. I love it. Is there anything else you could think of that you'd like to share to our listeners and viewers?
Just one more thing, and that is I spent a little time talking about some of the rules, legal rules, what accredited investor means, limits, investment limits. So that's all legal stuff. That's all well and good. I always say, fortunately, they have all those rules, so people have to hire me, because otherwise, what the heck? But crowdfunding fundamentally is just one thing, and that is the internet. That's all crowdfunding is. So when you think about what the internet has done to other industries and why it's done it and how it's done it, whether it's the retail industry or the taxi cab industry or the hotel industry or the dating industry for that matter, what does the internet do? It connects people directly.
Right.
It bypasses all the middlemen, right? Bypasses middlemen. whether they're bookstores or whoever, and connects buyers and sellers. Okay, now in the entrepreneur capital raising business, the buyer is the investor and the seller is the entrepreneur. And in the past, they couldn't meet directly because there was no advertising. They had to work to find each other through all these middlemen and brokers and different people. I often say all of Manhattan, from the Hudson to the East River, they're all middlemen. That's all they do. They just connect investors to businesses.
Right.
And what the internet does is lets those two groups connect, boom, directly, like magnets. And that's all crowdfunding is. But that's super, super important. It allows entrepreneurs to raise capital no matter where they grew up or what school they went to or who their parents are. It allows investors for the first time using the internet to get access to deals, great deals that have always been hidden and only had access to the super wealthy. So this concept of letting entrepreneurs and investors meet online directly without the middlemen is hugely important, I believe, for the future of entrepreneurship. And as we say, the democratization of capital, letting ordinary Americans have access to those deals. So that's what I'd like people to remember. It's just the internet. That's all crowdfunding is. That's
great. I love it. I love it. Mark, it's been some great information. Thank you for being on. I really appreciate you sharing. And thank you guys, everybody, for watching. Please be sure and share this, like it, follow, and and leave us a comment if you don't mind. We really greatly appreciate that. And thanks so much for being on, buddy.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. You take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.